session. We have Neha Srivastav here with us. Neha is a senior software engineer at Attentive. She's an experienced engineer with over a decade of experience in various Fortune 500 companies. She is passionate about diversity and inclusion in the technology workforce. Outside of work, she also runs a decolonial feminist nonprofit called Shaktitva. Welcome, Neha.
Thank you so much, Sukruta, for this introduction and this opportunity. So I'll start sharing my screen just a little bit, and then we can get started. Hope everyone can see me. Okay. So the topic of my conversation today is grokking the technical interview for women and minorities. Basically, the content of this presentation is likely relevant for anyone who's looking to give a technical interview, but I will focus a little bit on special challenges and tips for women and minorities, mostly because unfortunately, the interview experience can vary dramatically in the industry if you're a woman or a person of color. So I will share some of the tips that I've learned over the course of my decade-long career and hope that it helps. Okay, so in this presentation, we'll go over each of the interview process rounds when you're interviewing for a technical role, and we'll go over those in detail. I would love to answer any questions if you have time left at the end, but if not, please post questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer them in a follow-up LinkedIn post after the conference. Okay. Sukruta already introduced me, so I won't bore you, but please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have thoughts, feedbacks, or questions about the presentation. I'd be happy to help. All right, so the interview process. Now, as you may already know, there are typically about 6 or 7 stages in a technical interview, starting from the time the recruiter receives your resume to all the way to offer negotiations. In these upcoming slides, I'll kind of go over each of those rounds in detail. One thing to note here is that the interview process can vary quite a bit across companies. Some companies are looking to hire for a very specific role. Typically, this is the common scenario in like early stage startups or even up to like a different series. Whereas others may be trying to find a good engineer that meets the bar, and they're confident to come up with a team fit later on. Now, depending on either of the scenarios, the order and the nature of the interview may vary. So let's get started. The first round, as you know, is the resume selection. It's not like officially a round, but this is the first introduction you have to a certain company. Now, generally, recruiters receive tens to thousands of applications of a specific role, depending on the company size and market conditions. Particularly these days, as you can imagine, the competition is much higher. Now, unless it's a huge company, most of the resume selection will happen manually, which means this is your first impression on a company, and this will be made through your resume. Now, there are many great resume improvement guides out there, so I won't go into too many details about that. But the key point I want to make here is that your resume should be tight and focused, one that gives the reader a good overview of your experience. In the US, typically a one-pager resume is preferred, and I would recommend that. The experience section should be thoughtfully crafted. What I mean by that is that it is entirely possible that you cannot fit all of your experience in the space you have in a resume, especially projects. If you worked in a company for, say, 5 years, you probably did so many projects, it's not possible to write down all of that in there. So one has to be mindful of what to mention in the bullet points under each experience. Now, my recommendation, pick your most impactful project, one where you did most of the work or where you were in a central decision-making position, or any one that you can discuss in depth. And mention that project by name. Now, if the project didn't have a name or if it was a mouthful, make up a name. The rest of the experience can be through generic bullet points. For example, let's say you worked at a company where you did several projects, but one project, the notification system, was if you were the tech lead for this, or you were the sole, like a primary developer on this, etc. So now you can phrase it in this way. Point 1, develop the notification system for this company, for this particular software. Point 2, optimize software on-call processes. Contributed to different projects throughout the company, for various improvements. And you can mention technologies and intersperse this with more details. Now, why am I suggesting that you give a name to at least one project or mention one project by name? Well, because it will give you excellent talking points for the next 2 or maybe more rounds if you get selected. Now, as I said, resume crafting is a skill, and you may have to go through several iterations to make it perfect. Use tools to get there. Use AI tools like GPT or Bard to really fine-tune the language. Now, I want to mention that a few friends and I worked on a project called Resume Analyzer on the side, and it's available for you to use at resume.recruit.ai. This connects you to GPT behind the scenes, and it will give feedback on your resume. So you can upload a PDF and you can see how that resume fares. Please do give it a try. Although this is a work in progress, and we'd appreciate any feedback you may have through our Discord community. So if it's a little bit clunky, please bear with us. Okay, so next is the recruiter round. Now, let's say if your resume had its intended impact and you got selected for interviewing, you may get an email for a recruiter to schedule the first round. This is typically called the recruiter screen sometimes. Now, as we discussed earlier, that resumes do not tell the whole story. So the purpose of this round is for the recruiter to get to know you a little bit, get a sense of your communication skills and also your experience. They want to get a better understanding of your competencies and your background. Now, it is generally an ad hoc conversation with the recruiter, but if you're actively interviewing, it's likely you'll be doing this many, many times. So I would recommend preparing an introduction speech, one that describes your past work succinctly and puts them in a broader picture. I would also suggest mentioning your career goals which you're looking to achieve in the new role that you're applying to. Of course, it should not appear like you're reading from a script. So this speech can be in whatever format, such as bullet points or sticky notes, anything that aids you in talking to the recruiter. You may also want to briefly mention a project that you worked on, or the recruiter may specifically ask you about one in the conversation. So pick one from the ones that I mentioned in the resume that you have added a name for, and use like one of the recent ones. So preferably from your latest experience. Again, this is preferred but not necessary, and talk about it in depth. Now, the tool that I talked about, the Resume Analyzer, it also has a tab for introduction speech as well. So do check it out and let us know if it's helpful. Last but not the least, you should make sure to discuss level and compensation expectations with the recruiter in this round itself. This is very important. Some companies have a generic interview process where they'll tell you that they'll decide the level based on how the interview goes. That's fine, but you should still mention what level and range of compensation you are targeting so that everybody's on the same page at the beginning itself. Now, how do you come up with those target compensation and expectations? Well, do market research to understand what developers at your level are paid in the industry. This is not based on how much you're currently making, but rather based on the role being offered. In some states, recruiters are prohibited from asking your current compensation. So use that. Ask for an expected range if it's not already in the job description without offering your current salary details. Be clear and nonchalant about it. Now, sometimes, again, this is more common with women and people of color, but sometimes people think that if they ask for less money, they're more likely to move forward in the interview process. This is a misconception. It is important to understand that companies already have a set budget assigned for this role long before the job description is even posted on the internet. Again, in some states like New York, it has now become mandatory for companies to advertise a salary range for a given job. If the job description did not mention any salary range, ask the recruiter straight up for it, then decide whether it meets your goals or not. If it's a broad range and your expectations are within the range, then mention that. With something like, my compensation expectations are in the range of X or Y, and if it's on the higher end of the range that you described in the job description, just to kind of make things very, very clear right from the upfront. Hopefully that helps. Now, if this works, you will be moving forward possibly to a hiring manager round. Now, this is where things get a little bit the variations occur between companies and the formats they use. So in this round, in this situation, this will be your first technical interview. Every company schedules it differently, so this round may happen before, after, or same day as the technical screen. You will typically be speaking to an engineering manager or a team lead who's likely going to be your immediate manager upon hiring or someone of an equivalent level. But now this is like I'll sort of asterisk this with the caveat that this is only in a scenario when they're looking to hire for a specific role. Generally, if companies are looking to fit you for a role at a later date, this round may not happen at all. But just in case it does, some tips might be helpful. Now, it's important to understand that the goal here is for the hiring manager to get a good understanding of you as a developer, your competencies, and your experience. It is similar to recruiter round in some ways, but in this round, you would want to be very, very technical. You want to talk a lot about technical details. Once again, I recommend picking a recent project as a tool to explain your experience. It can be the same project you use for the recruiter round, but you should be prepared to explain the vision, the business rationale of the project, the tech stack you used in this project, and the technologies you used. Give clear and concise descriptions about your role in the project. Be prepared to justify your technical decisions if asked about them, and if you were the decision maker specifically. The more senior you are, the more details you need to know and discuss. Now, when you're discussing the project, subtly bake in the contributions and wins through specific phrases in the sentence. For example, you could say, like, one option is to say, this project used Cassandra for its database. Or you could say, since I was the tech lead of this project, I chose Cassandra for its database because it seemed like it was the most suitable option given the kind of data we're dealing with. Now, of course, you'll actually explain the kind of data that you were dealing with, but this is an example. This way, you draw a mental picture for the hiring manager about your level of involvement in the project. Now, mention wins and stats about the project in hard numbers. I would reiterate this. Women and people of color tend to skip talking about their wins, and they'll sometimes unnecessarily generalize those wins. This is cultural, and this is we won't go into the psychology of why we do this, but don't do that. Be clear about your wins. Quote numbers and statistics, and quantify the impact of your project. You have to talk in hard numbers. Talk about the business impact of your project. Mention any accolades or awards or recognition that you may have received. Maybe you got mentioned at the engineering all hands for this work, or maybe you got a chance to demo the project in company all hands. Don't be shy about mentioning these things. It helps the hiring manager to know these things when they're making a decision, because helps them understand you better. Now, very often you may be asked about challenges that you faced in the project. For this, I recommend picking a challenge where you're the hero of the story. They'll ask about a technical challenge, but it's possible to not have one. In fact, you don't be shy in mentioning that the project was well planned out, and so there wasn't much that you hadn't anticipated, and there wasn't much drama around the release. That's a good thing. So in such a case, perhaps you can mention a procedural challenge, some challenge in the requirement gathering phase where you may have done some research and presented options to stakeholders to clear a logjam, maybe about a certain requirement that wasn't clear and was hampering the process or something like that. Most important thing in this round is to be open and honest. You're building a rapport with somebody who may end up being your manager. So don't make up things that didn't happen, but talk freely about the things that did. This round will also help you build that initial image, which will help you in the career if you do get accepted, and if you do end up working with them. All right, so the next round is the tech screen. This is arguably the most anxiety-inducing round in the tech interview. For this reason, a lot of people fall into the endless cycle of spending anxious nights on lead code and waking up in the morning feeling even more unprepared than they were before. I recommend avoiding that. The prep for this round is important, but you have to prepare smartly. Remember, you're not learning how to code during the prep. You already know how to code. You just need to brush up on the topics you haven't touched in a while. Personally, I find the content of educative.io or algoexpert.io more useful in preparing for this round than raw lead code battle of the nerves. Tech screens are not a referendum on your abilities as an engineer, and it is key to maintain your morale throughout the process. This round is only there for interviewers, so make sure that you can code. Now, the other thing about this round is that you're expected to talk about your thought process before you start coding. You would be expected to talk about the problem, ask clarifying questions, and come up with possible solutions for the problem. Then you can start coding any one of the solutions. You're not expected to narrate your coding, but you are expected to explain your approach and even discuss its pros and cons. Here's the thing, expect to know about the time and space complexity of the solutions you design. If this process is generally difficult for you, mock interviews with friends or strangers can help. There is a site called cramp.com where you can go and get paired with a developer for free to practice your coding round. There are paid options for mock interviews as well, but I don't recommend them as they're very expensive. But if you feel like you need additional resources, that's still an option. Now, you may or may not know the answer to the question that's being presented, but that's how it's going to be in your day job as well. They're not expecting to hire people with encyclopedic knowledge. Just show that you can work through a problem you've never seen before, because that's what they'll expect an engineer on their team to do in their day jobs. You don't have to ace it. You don't have to design the best test solution there is. You just have to work with the interviewer to set the expectations of the problem. If it's a hard problem and you didn't get to a working solution, that's fine. But as long as you're able to process the problem, come up with options, and you were able to show that you understand the concepts involved, it's fine. Especially do not fret over knowledge of syntax or libraries. In fact, these days, most interviewers are okay with it if you ask to Google a particular syntax or library usage, but ask before doing that in the interview. Just do your best. You'll be surprised at how good you are when you're not nervous. Next is the system design round. Now, it can be a part of the interview process as a tech screen or as part of the on-site or both. The more senior you are, the more important this round becomes, even more than the tech screen, arguably. The intent here is to understand your ability to architect technical solutions out of abstract or vaguely defined requirements. Part of the process is to ask the right questions, clarify requirements, and even make assumptions. So it's a very technical, communication-heavy round. You are expected to use a whiteboard if it is in person, or a whiteboarding tool like Miro to draw out your designs and organize your discussions. I would recommend familiarizing yourself with some of these tools if you don't already know them. For preparation, there's some great material out there. Use it. I personally like Algo Expert for this prep because there's a lot of recorded videos that show you how to even approach the problem in this round in the first place. Once again, you're expected to talk while you think, explain your choice of technologies, make quick back of the envelope calculations to show that you can quantify a problem. The more logical and nuanced your thought process, the better it is for interviewers to get a glimpse of your problem solving abilities. Now, if you're a senior engineer, it is likely that you already do this in your job, so it should not be a completely new process. However, the trick probably is to understand how to take a process that takes days or weeks in real life to something you do in an hour. Well, the answer is loads of assumptions, assume, clarify, move on. If you're someone who's targeting a senior role but have not done this, prepare using study material and do mock interviews. Now, the on-site. So if you cleared the screens, you're on to the big leagues. The on-site interview is one they'll likely invite you to spend about half a day in the office. It can be a virtual on-site as well for remote first roles. Your itinerary will consist of meet and greets, couple of technical rounds, and manager rounds. Personally, the technical problems on the on-site may be of a higher difficulty level than the tech screens, and these rounds will tend to carry more weight in the hiring decision. I found that companies and teams, perhaps more common in smaller companies, that they tend to ask more realistic problems in these rounds, so they'll give you a representative challenge from their actual business use case. However, the intent of the on-site is to basically assess how you would fare as a teammate for most companies. While the technical screens were about your individual achievement and competencies, the on-site is more about understanding whether you're a team player and a culture fit. One of the rounds can include behavioral assessments, even without explicitly saying so. So, for example, in the tech screen in the earlier process, the interviewer will be focused on your technical solution. But in this round, the technical in the on-site, your technical solution is definitely important, but so is your behavior as a potential teammate. So they're trying to get a glimpse of what it would be like to work with you in real life. So the quality of your technical solution is important, but again, like your behavior probably is more. They want to see if you can take feedback from interviewers and improve or build upon a solution that you're proposing. They also want to check for some red flags. Are you unnecessarily defensive of your design? Or can you make mistakes, and or can you admit to make that you made a mistake, and whether you can move on to improve the design. The ideal candidate here is confident, able to present and justify their technical choices, but also take feedback, change the design, and improve on it. All right, so the next round this is very important, and not a lot of people talk about it, and it's not very often discussed, but I did want to discuss this. If you're in the offer stage, congrats, but it's not done, right? If you get an offer that meets your expectations and level, that's great. But if you get a we like you, but then remember that there is more work to be done. You do not have to accept the offer as it comes. You can still negotiate. The best negotiation tactic there is to have options, so you can be prepared to walk away. Line up your interviews so that you give a few on-sites close to each other, that the offers come in around the same time. In the first call about the offer, listen carefully and take the time to think about it and compare it to other offers that you may have. Now, if you are being, lowballed, that is, if they come in with an offer which is below your expectation, stand your ground. Tell them that you like the company, but you have competing offers, and that makes your expectation that meet your expectations. And so there you're likely going to pick them unless they raise this offer. Once again, be prepared to walk away because you have options. Stand your ground. Lowballing on money and title, unfortunately, happens a lot to women. So, there's even a depressing statistic that 30% of the women above the age of 35 are still in junior positions, compared to just 5% of men. Less than 50% of women in the range of 24 to 35 are senior developers, as compared to 85% men. So this is partly because of the industry's epidemic of lowballing women and minorities. Don't accept the status quo. Push for the level you expect to be at. Make a stand for your career and be prepared to walk away. Now, a lot of people wonder that if they push too hard on the numbers, then it may, or title, then it may ruin potential relationships with the team. Here's the thing. Firstly, it's quite likely that your teammates and even your manager have no idea of what compensation you're being offered or about the negotiation. Especially since IC and EM tracks deviate in mid-level, it's possible that in IC you may end up getting paid more than your manager. So most likely HR does not disclose pay levels to managers. So the possibility that your negotiations will impact your team rapport is low. However, let's say the team does know. Then you have to think that if it's the kind of team that gets upset that when you ask to be paid at market rate, if it's the kind of team that you want to work with, right? So that, in my mind, like, that is a huge red flag. So all in all, the mantra is stand your ground and be prepared to walk away. Lastly, here are some of the resources I mentioned throughout the presentation. I'll share the slides on my LinkedIn, perhaps so you can have them or you can take notes now. The technical interview process is unfortunately extremely tiring, taxing, and painful for everyone. So the key is to manage your morale and confidence. Managing your morale throughout the journey is extremely important. Sometimes I literally leave notes for myself to remind me that I'm enough and to not get bogged down by the process. So do that if it helps you. And thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Neha. Everyone should take a quick screenshot or just go to your LinkedIn. Really appreciate this talk and all the content you've shared with us. Thank you.